The night air hung thick with damp fog on the outskirts of Portsmouth. You can almost feel the chill biting through the heavy wool of an officer's greatcoat, see the faint glow of lanterns bobbing silently along the docks. Everywhere, the low hum of engines churned beneath the surface. By the shoreline, 50 Allied warships sat anchored like steel guardians, poised to carry thousands of men across the cold and dark channel toward an uncertain fate. Somewhere nearby, in a dimly lit war room deep beneath a reinforced command bunker, the hum was different, quieter yet heavier with the weight of impossible choices. Maps lined the walls, glowing under the flicker of overhead lamps. Pins marked beaches along the French coast, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, soared each name already branded in the minds of the men who planned to storm them. This was no ordinary night, no routine briefing. Sweat clung to brows under caps as voices lowered, each syllable laced with urgency and veiled fear. Inside this underground nerve center, General Dwight D. Eisenhower stood statuesque but restless. His eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned every briefing paper and latest reconnaissance report. The clock ticked louder in these moments than anywhere else. This was the final stretch of planning for Operation Overlord, the great invasion that would decide the fate of Europe. Outside, waves slapped rhythmically against hulls, mingling with distant siren calls and the faint murmur of men praying or writing last letters. Somewhere on the horizon, bombs from the Luftwaffe could pierce the uneasy calm at any second. The Allies had gathered their strength in secrecy, but German watchful eyes remained relentless. Suddenly, a sharp knock interrupted the murmur. A courier appeared, clutching a fresh intelligence update. Eisenhower's fingers tightened on the report. The data inside had the potential to change everything. New information from spies, aerial photographs showing unexpected troop movements. The clock was relentless. The invasion date stood firm June 6th, but the variables still swirled like the shifting tides below. Weather, enemy defenses, the strength of surprise. Every man in that room knew that once the signal was given, there could be no turning back. And above all, the question haunted the air like a storm. Would those thousands of men, riding in dense columns of landing craft across 50 miles of hostile sea, break through the lethal beach defenses fast enough to secure a foothold in Normandy? Or would the dream of liberation become a massacre under fire? A pause fell over the room. Eyes met, shared resolve mixed with dread. Then Eisenhower whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "We go forward, no matter the cost." Suddenly, a low rumble sounded beyond the concrete walls, engines firing up for the crossing. The moment of truth was near. What hidden challenges lurked between those ships and the shore? What decisions inside these walls would make or break the greatest invasion in history? The morning light seeped faintly through narrow slits in the bunker walls as planners gathered again. But outside, a far subtler battle was unfolding, not on beaches or in the skies, but in the shadowy intelligence war waged against the German High Command. London, early June 1944. You can almost hear the constant tapping of teleprinters and the fluttering of secret papers passing through hidden hands. Every piece of information had to be a thread in a vast, intricate web designed to snare the enemy's attention far from Normandy. Brigadier John Bevan of the London Controlling Section sat quietly at his desk, staring at maps littered with fake troop placements. This was the birthplace of Operation Fortitude, a code name for an elaborate deception that sought to convince Hitler's commanders that the main Allied invasion would strike somewhere else entirely, Pas de Calais, just across the narrowest channel. Thousands of faux installations, inflatable tanks, and phantom radio transmissions formed a shadow army. Men who didn't actually exist became the backbone of a ghost force that stretched across southern England. The Germans were watching, and they had spies. But what the Allies gave them to see was carefully curated illusion. Fake wireless messages bounced back and forth from fake division commanders. Operation Fortitude also used double agents like the legendary Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo, who fed the Germans falsified reports with deceptive precision, earning their trust while slowly unraveling it. In a dim room at Camp X, agents typed coded messages into wireless sets under flickering candlelight. Every leaked document, every choice of troop movements, carved out a false narrative the Nazis would believe, delaying their reinforcements on the real invasion beaches. Back in the bunker near Portsmouth, General Ike received daily intelligence sweeps and photos from the skies. Reconnaissance planes captured images of German defenses, thickening in some areas and thinning in others. The Allies' gamble rested on sustaining Hitler's indecision for just a few critical days. A whispered question clawed at the minds of the planners. Could the deception hold long enough, given the signs of growing German readiness around Normandy? A soldier called in a report. Enemy patrols spotted nearer the beachhead than yesterday. Possible shift of panzer divisions. Eisenhower's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. We must proceed as planned. The gamble is made. Below the theatrical ruse of false armies operated the even more vital machinery of Allied cooperation. Intelligence agencies from Britain, the U.S., and Canada coordinated like a well-oiled machine, translating the chaos of information into actionable strategy. A delicate dance behind the scenes that could make the difference between disaster and victory. Every secret coded signal, every forged document, every staged tank was a stroke on the canvas of a plan designed to fool a ruthless enemy. But as the countdown to June 6th closed, the pressure to maintain this fragile illusion grew unbearable. The tighter the grip of deception needed to be, the more dangerous a single misstep became. Would this web of lies hold? Or would the Germans cut through the fog of misinformation and strike before the first boots hit shore? From the coastline of southern England, massive steel hulls loomed in shipyards like silent beasts awakening from slumber. You can almost hear the clang of hammer on metal, the roar of engines testing their strength, the shouted orders of dockworkers racing against an invisible clock. Behind the scenes of grand strategy, Operation Overlord's success depended on an unprecedented mobilization of men, machines, and supplies, a sprawling logistical beast hungry for preparation. In the dry docks of Southampton and Portsmouth, thousands worked day and night assembling landing craft designed for one brutal purpose: to carry men directly onto heavily fortified beaches. The landing craft, vehicle, personnel, LCVPs, nicknamed Higgins boats after their designer Andrew Higgins, were shallow, armored vessels with a momentous ramp that would drop to allow soldiers to surge forward into enemy fire. While engineers tested the seaworthiness of these crafts, supply officers oversaw the collection of everything from food and medical kits to explosives and waterproof radios. The sheer volume was staggering. Tens of thousands of tons of equipment needed to fit onto hundreds of ships, synchronized for departure across a narrow, storm-prone body of water. Meanwhile, personnel selection was an emotional crucible. Brigade commanders met with men from scattered units, blending battle-hardened troops with freshly trained replacements. The 1st Infantry Division, nicknamed the Big Red One, assembled with grim determination, knowing many would become fodder for German defenses. Among the new recruits was Private James Hartley, a farm boy from Iowa. Letters to his mother still folded in his breast pocket, he stared at the landing crafts lined up. The silence before battle weighted on his shoulders like a shroud. You can hear his shallow breaths mixing with the creak of wooden planks underfoot. Aircraft designers also contributed vital assets for the coming storm. The Allies adapted everything from tanks designed to float to specialized bombers that could clear obstacles on the beaches. For weeks, experimental crafts like duplex drive amphibious tanks were tested under icy conditions. All these machines symbolized one thing: the desperate will to bend technology to break a seemingly impregnable enemy line. In briefing rooms, troop commanders repeatedly rehearsed assault plans down to the smallest detail. Every fisherman's hut, every dune, every tide schedule was studied obsessively. Maps and aerial photos became sacred relics. The men memorized every contour of Normandy's coastline, while commanders wrestled with the question, how to keep chaos out of a battle by its very nature chaotic. Yet, even with steel and manpower, the human cost hovered invisibly. For every success anticipated, a price exacted in lives terrorized the planners' minds. There was no room for error. Failure meant more than defeat. It meant thousands more bodies lost on foreign soil. As final inspections commenced and the fleet ready to sail, an urgent wireless message crackled through command channels. A storm was gathering in the English Channel, winds shifting faster than expected. The entire operation faced nature's cruel uncertainty. Would the weather hold long enough to cross? Or would the sea itself become the enemy that would delay or doom the invasion? Night blanketed the English Channel, but the sea beneath was a restless beast. You could almost hear the low growl of the wind building far out over the waves, the roar of tides battering against the rocky coastlines of England. Lanterns flickered defiantly on ships as sailors scanned the horizon, faces sharp with tension. High above, meteorologists in cramped rooms wrestled with conflicting reports. The fate of Operation Overlord hinged on one element beyond human control: the weather. Captain James Stagg, the chief meteorologist advising Eisenhower, pored over data from scattered weather stations and reconnaissance flights. His face, usually calm and collected, betrayed the weight of unbearable responsibility. The brief window of opportunity for a cross-channel invasion was perilously narrow. The sea states had to calm, the skies clear of fog, and the tides favorable, all conditions posing a precarious balance. "Tomorrow morning," Stagg said grimly to Ike, "may be our best and only chance." But reports showed the storm was intensifying, waves crashing high enough to swamp landing craft and toss men like rag dolls. Then came the chilling realization: the original plan for June 5th was no longer viable. Inside the war room, Eisenhower faced a terrible dilemma: whether to delay a carefully synchronized attack or risk it on nature's volatile whim. Delay meant the Germans could strengthen defenses, move back reinforcements. But pressing forward could mean drowning soldiers before they even reached shore. A palpable silence fell. Every general and admiral knew the stakes. Eisenhower looked across the table at General Bernard Montgomery and Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay. They all wore the steely resolve of men who'd faced impossible odds, yet had never confronted a foe so capricious. Eisenhower's hand hovered over the maps. Then, in a voice steady but heavy, he issued the order to delay by 24 hours after one final weather report. Every commander's radio crackled with the historic news. Soldiers like Private James Hartley heard whispers ripple through the ranks. Some cursed the delay. Others prayed it would save lives. The waiting was agonizing. As dawn broke on June 5th, the weather worsened. Winds howled, rain drenched steel, visibility plunged. Ships rocked violently. Some men clung to rails, bracing against nausea and fear. Yet beneath the storm's roar, the command bunker buzzed with renewed energy. Stagg's latest forecast showed a rare brief lull predicted for the evening of June 5th into the early morning of June 6th, just long enough to launch. The gamble was deadly, but the clock was unforgiving. Did the wind and tide really cooperate? Could the invasion fleet cross an unforgiving sea in darkness and chaos? Would the men who had trained so long finally get the signal, go? Or would nature's fury wash away the greatest moment of the war before it began? The clock struck midnight on June 6, 1944. You could hear the restless murmurs of thousands of men braced against the biting cold of the English Channel night. The seas were still rough, waves slapping hard against steel hulls. The smell of salt and diesel mingled with sweat and fear. Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Ted Manning stood firm on the deck of his landing craft, gripping the railing as the churning water tossed the vessel like a toy. His breath came out in sharp, visible puffs. Around him, soldiers checked weapons, whispered last prayers, clutched letters to loved ones. The air was thick with tension. This was no ordinary voyage. Ahead waited heaven and hell in one terrifying stretch of sand and wire. The flotilla began its slow crawl away from the English coast. Blacked-out ships cut through dense fog, engines straining against waves. Navy escorts kept watch, guns ready to blast any lurking submarines or night raiders. Radio silence hovered over the fleet, broken only by clipped, urgent commands spoken through crackling headsets. Commanders below decks imagined the beaches in eerie flashes. Omaha's deadly cliffs, Utah's marshes, the German pillboxes lined with machine guns and artillery batteries. Somewhere in the darkness, the whispered fears were loud enough to drown out the engines. What if the entire plan unraveled under fire? What if this crossing became a bloody trap? But the Allied soldiers brought more than weaponry and steel. They carried hardened resolve. Lieutenant Colonel Manning felt it deep in his spine, the weight of history on their shoulders, but also the fire of a desperate hope. Everyone knew this landing could save millions from tyranny. The first light of dawn had not yet touched the horizon when the first landing crafts reached the beaches. The infamous Easy Red sector of Omaha roared to life with shellfire. The silence snapped into a hellish cacophony of explosions, screams, the rat-tat-tat of automatic weapons. Manning's craft shuddered as it hit the beach, ramp dropped, and men spilled out into waist-deep, icy water thick with barbed wire and debris. Every step forward was agony. Bullets zipped past, sand exploded beside them, comrades fell. Above the chaos, the generals and command centers back in England and on ships watched intently. Radios alive with fractured updates, a mixture of hope, panic, and grim determination. In the command bunker, Eisenhower sat frozen for a moment. His famous message, prepared in case of failure, rested unopened. But something deep inside told him this was the moment that might turn the tide. Every man on those beaches was fighting not just for survival, but for a chance to liberate millions shackled by war. And yet, as waves swallowed bodies and the noise swelled into madness, the question burned brighter than the morning sun. Could this fragile foothold hold against the ruthless storm of German counterattack? The dawn broke in a grisly haze over Omaha Beach. You can almost feel the sharp sting of cold salt spray mixed with smoke-choked air as chaos reigns. The water churned crimson. Men struggled forward through waist-high surf, dodging bullets slicing the mist. The obstructions planted by the Germans snagged boots and flesh alike. Captain John Miller, a hardened company commander from the 29th Infantry Division, led his men forward with grim determination. His voice cut through the roar, barking orders, rallying soldiers to press beyond the deadly shoreline bluffs. His trembling hands barely managed to steady the trembling Thompson submachine gun he gripped. Here, the well-laid plans met the brutal reality of war. German defenders dug deep into reinforced concrete bunkers, unleashed torrents of machine gun and mortar fire. Razor-sharp barbed wire and felled trees turned the beach into a lethal maze. The air was thick with the cries of the wounded and the relentless echo of artillery. Despite the slaughter, pockets of resistance began to form. Sergeant Robert "Bob" Hughes, barely 19, strapped explosive charges to wooden stakes and hurled them into gaps in the enemy lines, his heart pounding. Up on the cliffs, Army engineers pushed forward, risking death to clear lanes through obstacles that blocked the way inland. Every moment counted. Each delay meant more comrades falling, more blood spilled on the sand. The command ships offshore listened anxiously to fragmented radio reports. Enemy fire intense, heavy casualties. We're pushing through. Hold the line. The strain in voices betrayed the severity of the fight. Yet, amid the carnage, acts of sheer bravery illuminated the horror medics pulling wounded men from no man's land. Soldiers throwing themselves onto grenades to shield their mates. Officers leading daring charges against hopeless odds. In the war room, Eisenhower's hand hovered over the prepared statement that would announce failure. A cold sweat broke on his forehead. Would this be the moment where the dream of liberation crashed into the nightmare of defeat? Then, word came that the first foothold had been established, small but crucial. The American flag, tattered and soaked, was raised amid the smoke. But the battle was far from over. German panzer tanks rumbled in the distance, poised to smash the fragile beachhead. Reinforcements and supplies had to shore up this bleeding edge. Could the Allies hold the blood-soaked sands of Omaha? Or would this sliver of conquest be overwhelmed under a barrage of deadly counterattack? Back in the command bunkers, the room was a hive of tense activity. Radios crackled nonstop as urgent reports streamed in, some garbled, others deathly clear. Every word meant life or death for men in the maelstrom on the beaches. General Omar Bradley, commanding the U.S. First Army, leaned forward over the map table, fingers tracing the fragile lines of Allied progress. His face was a mask of steely resolve, despite the exhaustion pressing deep beneath his eyes. Intelligence suggested the Germans were divvying up panzer divisions, but time was short. From afar, Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay coordinated the naval flank, ordering landing craft to rush reinforcements and critical supplies. Coordination was a logistical nightmare. Waves, mines, and enemy fire tore through vessels, delaying vital support. Meanwhile, Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tedder managed the skies, directing fighter patrols to suppress the lethal Luftwaffe attempts to bomb the invasion fleet. Fighter planes roared overhead, diving into dogfights. Every minute they dominated the sky was a lifeline for the men struggling on sand and stone. But even with this orchestration, commanders faced gut-wrenching choices. Every decision carried the weight of sacrifice. In one moment, Eisenhower received disturbing news. The paratrooper drops behind enemy lines, crucial for disrupting German reinforcements, had scattered widely during the night, many troops stranded or lost. The general considered his next move. Should he commit reserves early, risking exposure, or stick to the original timetable and pray the scattered forces regroup? Behind closed doors, Eisenhower penned a message to London. A brief note of grim resolve opening with, "If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt to storm the continent, I am it alone." His humility betrayed the inner storm. The responsibility of thousands of lives weighed against the hope of victory. Meanwhile, on the front lines, soldiers fought not just against enemy bullets, but against fatigue, chaos, and fear. Letters home were tucked in breast pockets. Thoughts flickered of family and future lives now perilously uncertain. Brigadier General Norman Coda famously rallied men amidst the carnage, charging down beaches to push back despair, shouting orders with a voice that cracked through the din. The tide of battle was uncertain, but so was the outcome of any war waged with such human cost. Would the commander's decisions steer this tempest into victory? Or would the mounting sacrifices be swallowed by a sea of chaos? Amid the thunder of guns and the roar of ships, there were moments quieter, but no less charged with meaning. You could almost feel the tense silence in makeshift aid stations, the smell of antiseptic mixed with sweat, and the sharp tang of fear in the air. Private James Hartley, wounded but alive, lay on a stretcher covered in sand and blood. Nearby, Corporal Mary O'Connell, a battlefield nurse, worked tirelessly, her hands steady despite exhaustion. Each drip of blood, each moan of pain, told the story of sacrifice that didn't make headlines, the grinding reality beneath grand strategy. Letters half-written, whispered prayers shared between soldiers from all corners of the Allied nations revealed the common humanity behind the uniform. Faces lined with dirt and resolve gazed toward uncertain futures. Families back home waited with bated breath, unaware of the full horror or glory unfolding. Soldiers carried their hopes, their regrets, and their love with equal weight. In the command centers, reports of casualties rolled in relentlessly, thousands of lives lost or wounded in the opening hours. Yet every inch gained on the beaches breathed life into the hope that those sacrifices would end Nazi tyranny. In the midst of the horror, heroes emerged, ordinary men performing extraordinary acts with quiet dignity. Sergeant Hughes, having cleared a path through barbed wire, stood bloodied but unbowed, rallying the scattered troops to push inland despite the mounting odds. But the human toll was stark. Marine John Jack Anderson, who had landed at Utah Beach barely hours before, was later found by comrades clutching a photo of his wife, whispering promises he knew might never be fulfilled. Around the world, the news of the landing stirred a complex mix of relief and dread. For many, D-Day was a beacon of hope, piercing the shadow of war. Yet its price was etched in every fallen soldier, in every grieving family. Behind the grand plans and heroic images was a raw and painful reality, a brutal confrontation forever seared into the memory of those who lived and died. What stories would survive? What lessons could the world learn from the sacrifice and valor unleashed on that fateful day? By midday, the bloody chaos of the early hours began to shift. You can almost hear the thunderous roar of Allied artillery pounding German positions, the distant rumble of tanks carving paths through hedgerows and fields beyond the beach. Brigadier General Norman Coda, his face streaked with grime and sweat, was at the forefront of the relentless push inland. His orders were clear: hold the gains, push forward, and break through German defenses before reinforcements could arrive. The battered troops licked their wounds in fleeting moments of respite, eyes scanning the horizon for signs of movement. The unexpected resilience of the defenders, combined with the dissected and scattered paratroopers, had slowed momentum. Yet, from the exhaustion and blood, determination forged an indomitable will. Eisenhower and his command staff monitored every radio transmission, every reconnaissance report, weighing progress against mounting casualties. Each inch gained was a Herculean struggle, but the beachhead was no longer just a tenuous foothold. It was the beachhead of hope, the springboard for liberation. At Gold and Juno beaches, Canadian and British forces met fierce resistance, but pressed forward methodically. Their combined firepower and air support slowly grinding down the enemy. Meanwhile, Montgomery's strategy focused on securing the eastern flank, preventing German counterattacks and making sure supply routes remained open. Behind the scenes, the logistical nightmare of feeding and reinforcing tens of thousands demanded constant vigilance. In the midst of it all, an unexpected event unfolded. German forces launched a furious counterattack with panzer tanks aimed at cutting off the spearhead. The thunder of tracked vehicles rolling through the countryside echoed a dire threat. But Allied artillery barrages and airstrikes halted the assault. Engineers laid mines and bulldozed defensive earthworks, turning the tide of the battle step by step. As afternoon faded into evening, the battered but unbeaten Allied forces consolidated their hold, eyes already turning to the daunting campaign ahead, the grueling liberation of Normandy and beyond. Yet questions lingered like smoke on the wind. Could they maintain this fragile grip? Would the supply lines endure? How many more would this war claim before victory? And deep behind enemy lines, the shadows shifted, signaling that the struggle for Europe was far from over. As dusk settled on June 6, 1944, the exhausted Allied commanders finally allowed themselves a fleeting moment to absorb what had been achieved. The cost was staggering. Tens of thousands of men lost or wounded, but the beachhead was secure. The invasion had succeeded in piercing Hitler's supposedly impenetrable Atlantic Wall. In the command bunker, Eisenhower penned a final order, his carefully measured words capturing the gravity of the sacrifice. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. Meanwhile, soldiers who had survived the ordeal sat huddled, faces streaked with grime and blood, some silently mourning fallen comrades, others writing hurried letters home. They were both victors and survivors, their stories etched into the collective memory of freedom. The success of D-Day marked the beginning of a relentless push across Europe that would eventually overwhelm Nazi Germany. It galvanized the Allied nations and shattered the myth of German invincibility. But the legacy was more than military. It was human. The bravery, the sacrifice, and the unyielding will of ordinary men and women reminded the world of the cost of tyranny and the price of freedom. Monuments and memorials now stand where those who landed at Normandy fought and died. Each stone, each name, a testament to courage and a solemn reminder of war's harsh reality. Yet the questions born that day about leadership, sacrifice, and the fragile hope at the heart of conflict continue to resonate. How do we honor those who gave everything? How do we carry their legacy forward? As the tides of history recede, the story of D-Day remains a beacon, a timeless testament to the courage and resolve that changed the course of the world forever.